Welcome to the Paranormal State, Washington, and UFO UAP. With Makāula Nakae, a lifelong experiencer and ET contactee since 1990. Today's episode: Late 1940s to 1950s, Echoes of Atlantis and Atlantean. The intersection of Atlantis and modern ufology represents one of the most fascinating bridges between ancient mystery and contemporary high strangeness. While mainstream archaeology treats Atlantis as a philosophical allegory, the alternative history and UFO communities have long integrated the lost continent into their core origin stories. Long before Kenneth Arnold coined the term flying saucer in 1947, pulp magazines, esoteric societies, and early writers like Ignatius Donnelly and Madame Blavatsky established the idea that humanity's ancestors possessed advanced, non-industrial technology. When the modern UFO era exploded post-World War II, ufologists didn't have to invent a framework for advanced ancient tech. The mythos of Atlantis had already primed the public to accept that a scientifically superior civilization had once dominated the Earth. In contemporary ancient astronaut theory, Atlantis is rarely viewed as a strictly human civilization that developed in isolation. Instead, modern theorists frequently reframe Atlantean achievements such as crystal-based energy grids, wireless power transmission, and global navigation as the direct result of extraterrestrial intervention or transfer. Drawing inspiration from Edgar Cayce's accounts and 1940s pulp lore like the Shaver mystery, some researchers argue that when Atlantis fell, its surviving scientists and engineers retreated into subterranean networks beneath locations like the Giza Plateau or Mount Shasta. This feeds into theories proposing that some UFOs are actually the lingering, highly evolved remnants of ancient terrestrial technology or advanced human offshoots. The narrative of Atlantis acts as a historical cautionary tale for humanity navigating the nuclear and digital age. Just as Cayce and mid-century contactees warned that the Atlanteans destroyed themselves through the hubristic misuse of the two-way stone, modern ufology frequently frames the UAP presence around nuclear sites as a cosmic monitoring protocol over a species on the same self-destructive trajectory. The integration of Atlantis into modern ufology did not happen overnight. It evolved in distinct stages alongside the birth of the UFO phenomenon itself. Before modern ufology existed, writers like Madame Blavatsky, Theosophy in the late 1900s, and Edgar Cayce in the 1930s framed Atlanteans as beings utilizing cosmic energy, crystals, and advanced sciences. While they didn't use the word UFO, they established the trope that an advanced, non-industrial civilization possessed physics far beyond conventional understanding. When the modern UFO era kicked off in 1947, alternative writers immediately began blending the new flying saucer reality with older lost continent lore. Early 1950s contactees, such as George Van Tassel at Giant Rock, bridged the gap by claiming that visiting space brothers were returning descendants or overseers connected to ancient terrestrial cataclysms. The true marriage of Atlantis and modern ufology solidified with the publication of Erich von Däniken's Chariots of the Gods. Researchers reinterpreted Plato's Atlantis as an outpost or colony founded by extraterrestrial visitors, rebranding ancient crystal technologies as alien physics transferred to early humanity. With researchers like Jacques Vallée introducing the interdimensional hypothesis, Atlantis was fully absorbed into modern high strangeness. Alternative historians began arguing that some UAPs represent surviving remnant technology, subterranean bases, or interdimensional descendants of the original Atlantean cataclysms. Edgar Cayce's readings regarding Atlantis constitute one of the most comprehensive lost history accounts in the 20th century. To Cayce, Atlantis was not a myth. It was a highly advanced technological civilization that served as the primary ancestor to modern human history, and its collapse serves as a perennial warning for our own era. When asking who first started talking about or writing about Atlantis, the history splits into two completely different worlds: the ancient literary origin and the modern mystical esoteric revival that Edgar Cayce drew from. The concept of Atlantis did not originate with Edgar Cayce or 19th century occultists. It was first introduced by the ancient Greek philosopher Plato, circa 360 BCE. Atlantis appears in two of Plato's late philosophical works, Timaeus and Critias. Plato described Atlantis as a vast, technologically advanced, and morally corrupt island empire that attempted to conquer the ancient Mediterranean before being defeated by prehistoric Athens and subsequently sinking into the ocean in a single day and night of misfortune. Most classicists and historians agree that Plato invented Atlantis as a fictional allegory to illustrate his political theories about the hubris of powerful nations and the ideal structure of society. For centuries, Plato's story was treated as a myth or philosophical fable. The person who resurrected Atlantis and turned it into a real, lost technological civilization in the modern era was Ignatius Donnelly, 1882, a former U.S. congressman and writer. In 1882, Donnelly published Atlantis, the Antediluvian World. He took Plato's story literally, arguing that Atlantis was a real physical continent that served as the cradle of all subsequent human civilizations, giving rise to Egypt, the Mayans, and European cultures, and that it possessed advanced architecture, metallurgy, and seafaring. Donnelly's book became an international bestseller and sparked a massive global obsession with lost continents. Shortly after Donnelly, Helena Blavatsky, late 1800s, the founder of Theosophy, incorporated Atlantis into a grand esoteric framework of human spiritual evolution. Blavatsky claimed through her secret doctrine that humanity evolved through a series of root races and that the Atlanteans were the fourth root race. She introduced the ideas of psychic powers, crystal usage, and deep spiritual schisms within Atlantean society. This theosophical framework heavily influenced early 20th century occult thought. By the time Edgar Cayce began giving his trance readings on Atlantis in the 1920s and 1930s, the ideas popularized by Donnelly and Blavatsky were already circulating in alternative and esoteric circles. However, Cayce uniquely operationalized the myth. While Donnelly argued from historical archaeological data and Blavatsky argued from esoteric philosophy, Cayce claimed he was accessing the Akashic records directly to describe the specific daily life technology, like the two-way stone, geology, and exact timelines of the three cataclysms. Plato invented the story as a philosophical fable. Ignatius Donnelly turned it into a modern historical theory in the 19th century, and Edgar Cayce transformed it into a detailed, spiritual karmic narrative that heavily shapes modern alternative history and ufology today. To understand Edgar Cayce's vision of the crystalline civilization, one must examine the specific mechanics and principles detailed across his trance transcripts, most notably reading 445 from December 1933. Cayce did not depict Atlantis as an era of iron, steam, or digital silicon. Instead, he described an advanced system of etheric engineering and crystal harmonics, a paradigm where planetary, solar, and cosmic energies were focused into a unified, wireless power grid. Cayce referred to the master energy source of Atlantis as the two-way stone or the Great Crystal. The two-way stone was a massive, multifaceted, cylindrical crystal cut in a six-sided prismatic form. It was engineered with specific optical and molecular alignments, capable of capturing both visible light and invisible spectrums of radiation representing cosmic, solar, and geomagnetic rays of the highest octave. The crystal was housed within an oval or domed central power plant, constructed with specialized non-conducting materials, resembling modern asbestos or synthetic insulation. The roof of this facility featured movable, motorized coping stones that opened to expose the crystal directly to specific astrological and solar alignments. When opened, the crystal absorbed cosmic radiation, amplified the energy through internal refraction, and stored it within its crystalline matrix. Once charged, the two-way stone broadcast power across the continent through high-frequency resonance without needing physical transmission lines. Craft operating in the air, on land, and beneath the sea did not carry internal combustion engines or fuel tanks. Instead, they used tuned induction coils or receiving nodes that drew power directly from the central broadcast of the firestone, moving silently across great distances by riding the wave of this focused frequency. The crystal network served as a global information conduit. By modulating frequency output, the Atlanteans transmitted sound, visual imprints, and telepathic amplification across vast distances. In its early iterations, the stone operated as a medical instrument. Individuals stood within calibrated, low-intensity beams designed to stimulate cellular regeneration, realign the nervous system, and halt bodily decay. The collapse of Atlantean civilization was rooted in a spiritual schism over the control of this crystalline grid between two primary factions. This faction focused on spiritual alignment, non-interference, and unity with the Creator. They maintained the energy grid for collective healing, enlightenment, and harmonic balance with nature. This faction embraced materialism, self-gratification, and technological dominance. They exploited the energy grid for physical conquest, political leverage, and the subjugation of human labor, even utilizing the system to power infrastructure, based on the enslavement of early human subcastes. The transition of the two-way stone from a life-giving power source to a planetary weapon unfolded over millennia, driven by the sons of Belial overtuning the crystal's focal prisms to create directed energy weapons capable of disintegrating targets at long range. Seeking to eliminate underground bunkers and subterranean tunnels, these death rays were directed deep into the Earth's crust. The Atlanteans failed to account for the resonant interaction between the crystal's focus frequencies and the Earth's natural geothermal and electromagnetic balance. The high-intensity energy beams penetrated dormant volcanic reservoirs and subterranean gas pockets, triggering a thermal expansion that fractured fault lines from within. First disruption, c. 50,700 BCE. Miscalculated energy experiments fractured the main landmass into 5 primary islands. Second cataclysm, c. 28,000 BCE. Escalated energy warfare oversaturated the crust, sinking further territories and leaving only isolated island redoubts like Posidia, Arian, and Og. Final submersion, c. 10,000 BCE. The total misuse and overamplification of the crystal grid triggered the final sinking of Posidia, forcing remaining survivors to scatter toward Egypt, the Americas, and Western Europe. Cayce explicitly stated that the souls who engineered the rise and fall of the Atlantean crystalline grid are reincarnating en masse during our current industrial and digital age. He framed modern discoveries in lasers, nuclear energy, wireless telemetry, and artificial intelligence, not as brand new inventions, but as the reemergence of Atlantean principles. The central warning throughout his readings remains that when technological capability outpaces moral and spiritual maturity, the tools created to master nature will inevitably destabilize the civilization that built them. Popular culture often paints the destruction of Atlantis as a sudden cinematic disaster, a continent vanishing beneath the waves in a single, terrifying night of lightning and storm. However, Edgar Cayce's trance readings presented a starkly different, far more sobering reality. He described the downfall of Atlantis not as an isolated, overnight flash flood, but as a grinding, millennia-long ecological and geopolitical decline, marked by 3 distinct cataclysmic phases. Each phase of destruction reshaped the physical face of the planet, degraded the technological and spiritual capacity of the survivors, and directly forced the waves of migration that seeded ancient human civilizations across the globe. The first cataclysm, c. 50,700 BCE, the dawn of misalignment. The earliest phase of destruction occurred at a time when Atlantean society was vastly different from the high-tech urban landscape of its final centuries. During this primal epoch, the civilization was primarily agrarian and pastoral. The inhabitants lived in close integration with the natural world, though early factions were already beginning to experiment with harnessing earth energies, atmospheric gases, and early crystal resonators to manipulate weather patterns and boost crop yields. The catastrophe was triggered by early hubristic overextensions of these energy-harnessing experiments. By attempting to force natural systems beyond their tolerable vibrational limits, the early Atlanteans inadvertently destabilized localized tectonic plates. The resulting crustal shifts did not sink the entire continent at once, but they violently fractured the massive landmass. The unified continent of Atlantis was shattered into a cluster of smaller, isolated islands, primarily Posidia, Arian, and Og, surrounded by newly formed inland seas and shallow straits. This first fracture served as a severe warning from nature, though it was ultimately ignored as generations passed, and the memory of the disaster faded into myth. The second cataclysm, c. 28,000 BCE, the technological pivot. Millennia after the first fracture, the remaining island redoubts of Atlantis had rebuilt themselves, but their sociological trajectory had fundamentally hardened. Having lost vast swaths of fertile agricultural land during the first cataclysm, the survivors faced severe resource constraints. Rather than turning toward ecological or spiritual harmonization, the society made a fateful pivot toward aggressive technological mastery. They sought to bend the forces of nature, weather, and geology to their will to compensate for their shrinking geographic footprint. It was during this intercataclysmic period that the sophisticated crystal power grid, anchored by the great two-way stones, was heavily expanded. The elite and ruling classes sought absolute dominance over their environment, utilizing early forms of directed energy systems and weather control machinery. This aggressive manipulation of the Earth's electromagnetic and thermal equilibrium proved disastrous. The continued unchecked overuse of high-frequency energy arrays oversaturated the subterranean fault lines. The second cataclysm struck with immense force, further fragmenting and reducing the remaining land masses, drowning coastal cities and shrinking Poseidia and its sister islands down to a fraction of their former size. This disaster created a profound psychological trauma within the population, hardening the schism between the spiritual law of one and the materialistic sons of Belial. The final sinking, c. 10,000 BCE, the collapse of Poseidia. The final chapter of Atlantis was a concentrated terminal collapse that played out over decades, culminating in the complete submersion of the last remaining island, Poseidia. By this final era, the spiritual safeguards surrounding the master crystal grid had entirely collapsed. The sons of Belial controlled the infrastructure, turning the healing and power-generating beams into destructive thermal weapons. In attempts to obliterate political rivals and subterranean resistance movements, they directed high-intensity rays deep into the Earth's core. The focus frequencies struck active magma chambers and volatile gas pockets beneath the Atlantic basin. The resulting thermodynamic expansion caused widespread volcanic eruptions, massive sinkholes, and a catastrophic slip of the oceanic tectonic plates. In a series of rapid, violent geological convulsions, the island of Poseidia slipped entirely beneath the ocean surface. The final sinking was not merely an extinction event, it was a global dispersal. Knowing the end was coming, the surviving members of the Law of One and various refugees executed coordinated evacuations. They packed historical archives, scientific records, and specialized technical knowledge, fleeing outward across the oceans to establish new routes in regions that would become the cradles of ancient history. The slow, grinding destruction of Atlantis forced an unprecedented human diaspora that directly shaped the architectural and cultural layout of the post-Diluvian world. A significant faction of Atlantean refugees, particularly those preserving the spiritual and architectural sciences of the Law of One, migrated eastward across North Africa into the Nile Valley. Cayce explicitly connected these refugees to the foundational brilliance of early Egyptian civilization, claiming they provided the mathematical, astronomical, and engineering genius required to plan and construct the Great Pyramid and the Sphinx, as well as establishing the mysterious Hall of Records beneath the Giza sands. Other groups traveled westward across the Atlantic, landing in Central America and the Yucatan Peninsula. There, they integrated with existing indigenous populations, imparting advanced architectural layouts, stoneworking techniques, and calendar systems that laid the early blueprint for Mayan culture. Additional migration streams pushed northward into Western Europe and the Mediterranean basin, carrying fragmented memories of a global civilization that had reached the stars only to be consumed by its own internal hubris. By detailing these three distinct cataclysms, Edgar Cayce stripped away the romanticized myth of a sudden, magical sinking. He presented the fall of Atlantis as a slow-motion tragedy, a civilization given three separate chances by nature to course-correct its spiritual and technological trajectory, only to double down on its own destruction each time. For modern observers, the three destructions stand as a stark historical mirror, outlining the precise steps by which an advanced technological society can systematically dismantle its own planetary home. For Cayce, Atlantis wasn't just a place of history, it was a karmic incubator. Cayce spoke of a faction called the Children of the Law of One, who remained spiritually focused and resisted the temptation to use their technology for dominance. He suggested that many people alive today who feel a strange homesickness for the stars are a deep, inexplicable trauma regarding technology and societal collapse, are reincarnated souls from this specific Atlantean faction. He believed that the people who misused technology in Atlantis were essentially the same souls who are now driving modern technological advancement. He framed our current era with its nuclear capabilities, artificial intelligence, and global interconnectedness as a second chance for those souls to prove that they have learned the lessons of Atlantis. The modern UAP and high strangeness community looks to Cayce's Atlantis readings for several critical reasons. Many theorists argue that aliens didn't arrive out of the blue in 1947. Instead, they theorize that some Atlantean survivors are their technological legacy, went underground or into interdimensional states, and that the UAP phenomenon is actually a resurgence of this ancient lost technology. Cayce specifically linked the survivors of Atlantis to the construction of the Great Pyramid and the Sphinx. He claimed that the Hall of Records, a physical cache of Atlantean knowledge, is buried somewhere between the Sphinx and the Nile. This has fueled decades of high strangeness explorations in Giza, including claims of tunnels, hidden chambers, and energy-based artifacts. The most chilling aspect of Cayce's Atlantis narrative is the warning. He portrayed Atlantis as a civilization that reached a level of technological mastery identical to our own, only to be undone by its own hubris. For those in the UAP community who worry about the atomic UFO connection, Cayce's Atlantis serves as a historical warning label, a reminder that when an advanced society loses its moral compass, the technology it created will inevitably lead to its undoing. Edgar Cayce didn't just tell a story about a lost city. He provided a cosmic cautionary tale. He framed Atlantis as the original prototype of the current human technological experiment, suggesting that we are currently living through the exact same cycles of discovery, power lust, and environmental impact that brought the Atlantean continent to its knees 12,000 years ago. To trace the myth of Atlantis is to embark on a journey across the boundaries of human imagination, historical critique, and multi-dimensional memory. Mainstream historians have long taught that Atlantis was born entirely within the philosophical mind of Plato, sketched out in his late dialogues as an allegorical warning against political hubris before he could finish the tale. But one cannot help but wonder, was it truly just an invention? Or did Plato, in some profound subconscious way, tap into a deep, forgotten archive of human history? Did he unknowingly channel the shadow of a forgotten supercivilization? And if so, where did such staggering inspiration originate? As the centuries turned, this philosophical whisper was resurrected. In the late 19th and early 20th centuries, pioneers like Madame Blavatsky through theosophy and Edgar Cayce through his trances and the Akashic records breathed new life into the stones of the sunken continent. They revealed that the Atlanteans were not mere primitive ancestors, but masters of cosmic energy, crystal harmonics, and advanced sciences. Then came the mid-20th century, a time when humanity looked up at the skies with new anxieties and new hopes. When the modern UFO era exploded in 1947, with Kenneth Arnold's sightings and the Roswell crash, alternative writers immediately began to bridge the gap, weaving the new reality of flying saucers into the older, deeper lore of lost continents. By 1968, Erich von Däniken's Chariots of the Gods cemented the ancient astronaut theory, reinterpreting Plato's island not as an isolated human empire, but as a grand outpost founded by extraterrestrial visitors who had gifted their celestial physics to early mankind. As the 20th century matured, the New Age movement transfigured Atlantis from a mere lost historical epoch into a spiritual academy and a grand karmic testing ground. A massive wave of channeled literature poured forth, attempting to decode the hidden lessons of the sunken realm. Through channelers like J.Z. Knight, the ancient warrior entity Ramtha emerged, detailing the immense technological power and societal schisms of Atlantis as a cautionary lesson on the power of human consciousness. Jane Roberts brought forth the Seth material, teaching that time is simultaneous opening the door for seekers to realize they were not just reading history, but tuning directly into the living, vibrating frequency of Atlantean consciousness itself. In the 1980s and 1990s, starseed channels and authors like Doriel the Atlantean popularized the use of crystal grids and sound harmonics, reminding humanity that many souls currently walking the earth originally incarnated during the golden age of Atlantis are the stellar diasporas that preceded it. Following Cayce's passing, the Association for Research and Enlightenment, ARE, became a sanctuary where seekers studied the eternal schism between the children of the Law of One and the sons of Belial, recognizing that modern psychological blocks are often unresolved echoes of past Atlantean lifetimes. Channeling Atlantis was never truly about the past. It was an urgent call for karmic resolution. A reminder that humanity is skating along the exact same precipice of rapid technological growth and spiritual stagnation that consumed the ancient world. This living legacy of Atlantis transcends dusty books and channeled manuscripts. It breathes quietly just behind the veil of our ordinary reality, waiting for those with the eyes to see. Years ago, while living in Honolulu, Oahu, I attended a gazing session hosted by Braco, the renowned Croatian holistic figure known simply as the Gazer. Rather than speaking, teaching, or offering personal consultations, Braco stands upon a podium in absolute silence, locking his gaze with the audience for minutes at a time, transmitting an invisible, wordless frequency of peace and transformation. In Braco's official profile, the ancient world is never mentioned. Yet, as I stood in that room absorbing the silent transmission, my inner sight parted the veil. Standing directly behind him were two gigantic, towering beings, the true, silent power source anchoring his work, ancient Atlantians. A few days later, while conversing with other local psychics in town, I listened in astonishment as they spontaneously brought up the exact same vision, describing those massive Atlantean guardians standing at his back without any prompting from me. In that shared realization, the truth became clear. These ancient intelligences are not trapped in the past. They are active, intentional presences, revealing their enduring existence to anyone willing to quiet their mind and perceive through the subtle currents of clairvoyance. Atlantis is not gone. It is simply waiting on a higher frequency, humming quietly beneath the surface of our modern world. To be continued. Watch and listen. Watch the cinematic video trailer. Listen to the full podcast now. Explore the archived Cosmic Awakening Volume 1, 1991, Peru, Journey into the Unknown. Sacred Valley of the Incas. Volume 2, Ascension 2012, The Golden Alchemy. Part 3, The First Contact and the Paranormal State. Join the journey. New episodes drop periodically. Each chapter delivers a tight, hyper-focused 10 to 30-minute exploration into the evolution of ufology, perfect for your daily plunge into decoding hidden messages from outer space, designed to raise awareness and foster human evolution. Subscribe to support your inner development. Thumbs up to help push our channel through the algorithm. Comment below. Share your thoughts on today's episode.